At the moment, I'm going to go further into Robert Avens, the new Gnosis, chapter 2, From Phenomenology to Angelology, and it's now section 2, Phenomenal Archetype. So we try and get clear, what do we mean by archetype in the present context? How is it related to the phenomena, the term phenomena? We've been talking about Heidegger, about hermeneutics, about phenomenology, about the sort of equation of the terms phenomenon and image and angel in Hillman. And I don't really have time to make a whole lot of sense of this for people just jumping on board. There are several, I mean, it is quite niche already. So let's see. I'm going to be reading and then commenting. Let's see what we can find. Avens has proved difficult so far. From page 48. Phenomenal archetype. Jung formulated his ontology in terms of esse in anima, which is in some ways the primacy of the anima or soul. His intention was to save the phenomena by identifying soul and image. So in Jung, soul and image go together. They're identified. Images had to be considered now as, quote, as full realities, not mere fantasies, mere hallucinations, mere projections, not anything mere at all. That's from Hillman. So images are in a way substantial. Jung's most explicit statement portending this radical new orientation reads, quote, image and meaning are identical. And as the first takes shape, as the image takes shape, so the latter, the meaning, becomes clear. Actually, the pattern needs no interpretation. It portrays its own meaning. Jung is, in effect, saying that the archetypes of the unconscious, the pattern, should not be construed as the primary carriers of meaning. Archetypes in themselves are purely formal structures without specific content of their own. They acquire content or meaning only in the course of an individual life, that is, through imagination. The meaning of life is not something pre-established or to be found in life, but given with life itself, with images that are life itself. Okay, so there's a way here that there's a sort of this question of what is the source of vitality or aliveness, and it's sort of found in the archetypes in a certain way. Again, where sort of soul is connected with anima, animation, aliveness, and here image is connected in the same sort of category. So these archetypal forces that are realities, they derive, they're sort of they have meaning inherent within them, but that meaning is found within the life of individuals. It's not something that the archetypes in and of themselves are, in a sense, not something that we have access to. So this is a way of understanding that archetypes, in a way, they are phenomenal. We apprehend them phenomenally in our individual lives as phenomena, right? Through the imagination. So soul, image, imagination, meaning, and phenomena all go together in our experience of the archetypes. Okay. What this implies just briefly is that the, quote, as they said, the meaning of life is not something pre-established. So the meaning of life is a kind of category error question. The meaning of life, of all of it, life is not something that can be considered with respect to something else. So its meaning can't be the meaning of all of it. There's nowhere that we can stand to assess what is the meaning of all of it. So that is to say that meaning of life is meaning in life. The meaning that we experience is in life. We're not in a position to evaluate the meaning of life. And there's a way that for Jung and these sort of thinkers, these kind of images, these archetypes, they are life itself. They, in a way, contain uh, aliveness, and sort of the aliveness that we experience, that we feel, is in a way derived from them. Avens says, following Jung's lead, archetypal psychology, that of Hillman, stresses the phenomenal aspect of archetypes, i.e., the identity of image and meaning. That's what we were just talking about. Instead of asking how archetype and image are related as two distinct events, one begins with and concentrates on images in all their multiple implications. The adjective archetypal stands not for an unknowable and noumenal content in the unconscious, but rather for the unfathomable and polymorphous nature of the images themselves. I might suggest here that there's a slight sort of addendum to that, or I feel this is in a way emphasizing sort of one aspect of archetypes. Is he saying, Even says, the adjective archetypal stands not for an unknowable and noumenal content in the unconscious, but rather for the unfathomable and polymorphous nature of the images themselves. And so what I would say here is I think in their aletheic Heideggerian way, that archetypes show themselves, phenomena, they shine forth in their phenomenal aspect, but they also withdraw, and they withdraw into their hidden depths, the depths of the unconscious. And so I feel that the term archetype, when we use that in this way, we stress the phenomenal aspect of archetypes because they shine forth, right? They cast light in a certain way. But I feel that the term archetype is designed also to point to those hidden depths that the archetypes participate in. But so this is a slight disagreement with Avens. Avens says, by archetype, I can only refer to the phenomenal archetype, that which manifests itself in images. The noumenal archetype, which is in some way that which is withdrawn, that which is behind the phenomena, the noumenal archetype per se cannot, by definition, be presented, so that nothing whatsoever can be posited of it. That doesn't mean it isn't there. I don't know. I maybe it's the Heideggerian comparison is not apt, but it's kind of like, well, if I again, if I look at one of these books, if I see the phenomena of the book, its image, if I see it shining forth, you know, I could say, oh, because I can't see any of the other aspects, I can't see the noumenal aspect, that which it is for itself, or therefore I can't say anything about that. And I don't think that's true. There is a way that it is kind of unknowable or unfathomable, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In some way, I feel that the phenomena shine forth from that which they truly are. But I don't, yeah, I think it's nevertheless maybe true to say that we can't know the noumena in and of it themselves. And so we relate with the phenomena. Anyway, it might not be that big of a deal. As Avens was saying, by archetype, I can only refer to the phenomenal archetype, that which manifests itself in images. The noumenal archetype, per se, cannot by definition be presented, so that nothing whatsoever can be posited of it. In fact, whatever one does say about the archetype per se is a conjecture, already governed by an archetypal image. This means that archetypal image precedes and determines the metaphysical hypothesis of a noumenal archetype. So let us apply Occam's razor to Kant's noumenon. By stripping away this unnecessary theoretical encumbrance to Jung's notion of archetype, we restore full value to the archetypal image. I can see why that would be valuable. But I also feel that images, they point beyond themselves. They point beyond themselves. And isn't that obvious? I don't know, maybe it's not. Okay, so I'll continue. Hillman also rejects the term unconscious, insofar as it has come to obscure the imaginal. In archetypal psychology, that's Hillman's, the Jungian unconscious is no longer seen as a container filled with unknowable archetypes, but as a tool for deepening and interiorizing the psychic imagery. Quote, recognition of the reality of the unconscious is a recognition of the depth, fullness, and richness of psyche, that it has contents, that it is not a tabula rasa, a blank slate. I don't see why it can't be both. I mean, I don't know. In some way, I feel that the Kantian notion of the noumenon attunes us to the sort of hidden depths of things. And just because they're not knowable doesn't mean it's not useful to attune to them. And so there's a way that the unconscious is just supposed to refer to that which is unknown within. And positing that there is such a domain seems to me eminently helpful and in a way wise, humble. But and I don't see why, like if we use Hillman's phrase, that the quote, the recognition of the reality of the unconscious is a recognition of the depth, fullness, and richness of the psyche. I don't see why that needs to be in opposition to you. Maybe I'm just misunderstanding. Avens continues. Hillman has further clarified Jung's identification of image and meaning by distinguishing between the meaning of an image and its significance. And meaning is something subjective, given by us to the image. Significance is what the image gives to us. Okay, it is a gift of significance, fecund with implications. The archetype's inherence in the image gives body to the image. The fecundity of carrying and giving birth to insights. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that in a way, the whole point of it is that there is something beyond that, as he said, is inheres within the image. I feel that there's something that's beneficial. Something beneficial comes from positing the, in a way, the unknowable depths of archetypes. Anyway, images, they have both meaning and significance. The idea being that we give them meaning, but their significance is given to the image from beyond, in a way, from the archetype. As he said, the archetype's inherence in the image gives body to the image. the fecundity of carrying and giving birth to insights. The more we articulate its shape, the less we need interpret. Meaning is in the shape of images. Meaning is in the shape of images. Or as Heidegger would say, in their appearances, in their phenomenality. Hermeneutics, therefore, becomes superfluous and is replaced by imagination. Tricky. So we're going to quote again from Hillman here. So this is sort of Hillman's updating of Jung's ideas, and he is also, there's a way that for Hillman the imagination becomes quite important, and that this replaces in some way hermeneutics. And we're going to explore Hillman's quote to try and unpack what this means. He says, "To see the archetypal in an image is not a hermeneutic move. Hermeneutic amplifications in search of meaning take us elsewhere, across cultures, looking for resemblances which neglect the specifics of the actual image. Our move, which keeps archetypal significance limited within the actually presented image, also keeps meanings always precisely embodied. No longer would there be images without meaning, and meaning without images. The neurotic condition that Jung so often referred to as loss of meaning would be understood as loss of image." So Hillman is pointing to this move of focusing on the images as they actually appear in their phenomenal guise, in their phenomenality. And the consequence of this is that our imagination, in a way, our imaging, replaces hermeneutics. Avens comments, "Heidegger's great innovation was to transform Husserl's call to return to the things themselves into an invitation to explore the pre-conceptual togetherness of man and world. His name for this togetherness, or co-inherence, is Dasein, being there. Archetypal psychology, for its part, attempts to dig even deeper by going back to the mythical beginnings of the Heideggerian a priori in the imaginal psyche. The phenomenological slogan now reads, back to the images themselves. Or if one prefers, back to the angels themselves. For as we shall find in the course of this inquiry, things, in their pre-reflective givenness, are never mere things, but rather images, or better, imaginal bodies. Things are animated, not because we make them so, by means of some anthropomorphizing magic, but because they are members in the body of that great animal, the anima mundi, that to the early Greeks was the world of nature. Okay, so this way of conceiving of, instead of back to the things themselves, back to the images themselves, allows us to see that things are animated because they are in fact images, and that they are all members in the body of the anima mundi, what to the Greeks was the world of nature. Hillman's attitude towards phenomenology is best understood in terms of what he calls archetypal episteme, or archetypal reversion. Archetypal episteme is a psychological method that dismantles metaphysics by relativizing the pivotal points of its traditional edifice. pure reason from Kant, pure being from Hegel, pure logic from Husserl, and pure prehension from Whitehead. Okay. So Hillman is arguing back to the images, that things are images, and down with metaphysics. And he says, and this is sort of it relativizes all the different points of the edifice of metaphysics through all those thinkers, and then Avens says, in this method, one proceeds by methodically suspecting that any purity is too pure or too abstract to be true. This relativization is necessary because all rational knowledge, all our objective and universal ideas, are rooted in psychic reality. So there's a way that the ideas, the sort of metaphysical ideas of those thinkers that we just mentioned, they're all sort of quite high up, quite abstract, quite pure, and suspecting them is a sort of bringing them down to image, to archetype, in this way, which is called archetypal episteme or archetypal reversion, which is kind of psychologizing. But anyway, it's kind of questioning metaphysics as such using psychology. Avens says, as Jung has it, quote, between the unknown essences or spirit and matter stands the reality of the psychic reality, the only reality we can experience immediately. Extrapolating on Jung, Hillman submits that all knowledge must be examined in terms of archetypal images. All knowledge must be examined in terms of archetypal images. The archetypal position, quote, suggests nothing less than an archetypal episteme, an archetypal theory of knowing. The relativization of reason, however, does not result in psychologism. Hillman avoids psychologization, converting all things into psychology in a narrow humanistic sense, by insisting on the transpersonal, transsubjective, which I would just say transjective, transpersonal and transjective character of archetypes. So to me, this seems directly contrary what he was just saying on pages 48 and 9. There's a way that the withdrawn or concealed depths of archetypes are important to their ground or their body. Again, quote, the archetype's inherence in the image gives body to the image. I'm fine with regarding that the depths of the imagination are unknowable in the same way as the unconscious is deep. I think that's helpful. Anyway, yes, Hillman tries to do this, archetypal episteme by sort of back to the images themselves, back to the archetypes, that metaphysics is assessed in these terms, in terms of the archetypes. And he says that this avoids psychologization because the archetypes have a transpersonal and transjective character. In Miller's words, the words of David Miller, quote, the book The New Polytheism, quote, archetypes are not subjective dimensions of mankind projected outward onto mythical names and stories, but gods, i.e., worlds of being and meaning in which my personal life participates. Quote, the gods of polytheism are archetypal structures of a psyche that is by no means identical with man, but as Hillman says, displays itself throughout all being. The world is as much the home of soul as is my breast and its emotions. Okay, so it's talking about the inherence of archetypes within the world. The world as a home of soul. The world as home of the gods. worlds of being and meaning in which my personal life participates. Archetypes are not subjectively projected. We participate in them. Okay, so we've been talking about Hillman's archetypal episteme, or way of considering, in a way, the ontological priority of images or phenomena or archetypes. And I'm going to continue here. Hillman considers his work phenomenological, inasmuch as he too turns to things and events in order to let them tell us what they are. He also shares the phenomenologist's search for the essence of what is going on. However, Hillman distinguishes the psychological what from the essentialist tradition, the quiddities of Aristotle, as well as from the phenomenological search for essences. So, according to Hillman, his psychological method of archetypal episteme is distinguished from the essentialist tradition and also is distinguished from phenomenology. He says, this is Avens, the difficulty with the phenomenological standpoint is that it, quote, stops short in its examination of consciousness, failing to realize that the essence of consciousness is fantasy images. And just about that, I want to say that I feel that I feel that those images, those archetypal images, that I feel that they do have a kind of concealed participatory ground. This was somewhat equivalent in the first chapter on soul and world. We were making this distinction between presence and place. And so the presence of things, the way that they shine forth, occurs in a place, sort of by definition. And this sort of corresponds, presence and place sort of correspond to perspectival knowing and participatory knowing. And where the three, the presence, the perspectival is sort of connected with logos, with being, and within Jung, the will or agency, with consciousness. And in some way, the participatory knowing, the place in which that presence takes place, is more connected with the four, with the body, with the unconscious, with withdrawal, with the place, with the ground, with the context, with void, shunyata, or mother. And I feel that those go together, presence and place. And so if I apply that to what we were talking about here, I feel that there's a way that the images or the phenomena, they partake of both. And so I feel that those images have in some way a concealed participatory ground. So the images as the number three, the phenomena that shine forth take place, they're present in the place of the psyche as pluripotent void or shunyata, which is a kind of concealed participatory ground. Anyway, it's maybe not that important. I feel that Hillman is definitely emphasizing this sort of phenomenal aspect of archetypes. And I don't know, I don't think do we need to resort to Kant's noumena to posit a kind of concealed ground behind the phenomenal aspect of archetypes? I'm not sure. Let's continue. Avens says, the priority of fantasy, or what we can understand as the imaginal, I think, the priority of fantasy carried through to its full implications means that phenomenological reduction becomes imaginal reduction, or an archetypal reversion, a return to mythical patterns and persons of the psyche. The psychological question, what, is transformed into who, leading to the realization that there are gods in our ideas. There are gods in our ideas. Nietzsche pointed this out in Beyond Good and Evil in the first part. We also want to avoid the pre-trans fallacy here. We don't want to make a regression to, something too archaic. Jung pointed to that again and again. And I'm concerned that Hillman is making that mistake. Archetypal reversion implies that fantasy images are the fundamental facts, the imaginal images, are the fundamental facts of human existence. For it is from the stuff of these noumena, N-U-M-I-N-A, noumena, that we create our world, our reality. So again, this is a way of conceiving of the archetypes or the images as being kind of the ontological ground in a certain way. That's what we begin with, and we create from out of that our world, our reality. In the beginning is poiesis, the making of soul through imagination and metaphor. I think here we could understand poiesis is the making of soul from out of the archetypes, and when that takes place in sort of in the imagination, that's sort of one faculty of soul making. And I might understand metaphor as a kind of linguistic equivalent to imagination. Or another way to put it would be that imagination encompasses both linguistic and non-linguistic aspects, and the linguistic aspects are primarily metaphorical. Hillman says, first imagination, then perception. First fantasy, then reality. Man is primarily an image maker, and our psychic substance consists of images. We are indeed such stuff as dreams are made on. This reminded me of Peter Kingsley's idea in Catafalque that humanity is itself is an archetype. There's an archetype of humanity, a notion that we take on, that we are. And in a way, we've been identified with that archetype. This is a way that we create ourselves. We make our soul through. And again, I wouldn't want to talk about soul making. I would want to talk about soul growing or cultivating, organic metaphors rather than mechanical engineering metaphors, through imagination, through metaphor. We're almost finished with this section, so I'm going to continue here. Quote, the basic function of the imaginal gods, or what in Heidegger is the pre-reflective understanding, is to provide cosmic perspectives for the soul, enabling us to discover a sense of depth beyond the merely personal. At one point, Hillman calls this deepening process an appeal to, quote, the hidden God, Deus absconditus, who appears only in concealment. Avens is going to take up the notion of the hidden God in the concluding chapter. Again, so to me, this points to the notion of the suprapersonal through participation, which is again equivalent to sort of presence in place. There is an aspect of archetypes which is concealed, which is withdrawn, which is hidden. And I think for me, this corresponds with the this sense of depth which is beyond the merely personal. Are the collective aspect of these archetypes fully knowable? I don't know. Paul Ricoeur has observed that Heidegger's hermeneutic phenomenology represents a, quote, second Copernican reversal, in that the question asked by classic epistemology, how do we know, is inverted. by asking, what is the mode of being who exists through understanding? Heidegger inverts the theory of knowledge by a questioning which depends upon the manner in which a being encounters being, even before it opposes to itself. Heidegger inverts the theory of knowledge by a questioning which depends upon the manner in which a being encounters being, even before it opposes itself to it as an object in face of a subject. Okay, and now Avens is going to say a bit of what this means. Again, Heidegger's phenomenological turn is it kind of equivalent to a Copernican reversal in epistemology by trying to get at the question of the mode of being, which is presupposed in the asking of the question, how do we know? And Avens says, the meaning of Ricoeur's words is clear. Hermeneutic phenomenology begins with the recognition that ontology, the inquiry into the being of things, must be tied to an analysis of man, the being who is engaged in that inquiry. There is no presuppositionless, objective, or simply reproductive understanding. In Gadamer's words, Hans-Georg Gadamer, all our seeing is guided by the excess of fantasy. Okay, that didn't really help me. I mean, we kind of already understood that about Heidegger, so what's relevant about this? So what does Avens want to say? He says, as I pointed out earlier, in terms of archetypal psychology, this means that we never transcend the subjective premises in the psyche, and that all our knowledge ultimately refers to the gods who dwell in our ideas. All our knowledge ultimately refers to the gods who dwell in our ideas. And to put it differently, just as hermeneutic phenomenology can be considered as an attempt to question and interrupt itself, just as hermeneutic phenomenology can be considered as an attempt to question and interrupt itself, so the soul in archetypal psychology is less an object of knowledge than it is a way of knowing the object, a way of knowing knowledge itself. Okay, again, this is quite complicated, or it's sort of unnecessarily abstract, it seems to me, and I think essentially what it's saying is that in Hillman's archetypal psychology, the soul is sort of taking up this self-reflective positioning in a similar way that sort of, corresponds to Heidegger's sort of hermeneutic phenomenology, but in a way which is sort of more mythic, more archetypal, more imagistic. Okay, final paragraph. Avens says, I should like to maintain, however, archetypal psychology takes a step beyond Heidegger's second Copernican reversal by examining not only, quote, the manner in which being encounters being, but also the ideas themselves by which being is encountered. Okay, this also doesn't really help. Let's see what else Avens wants to say. He says, in other words, the Heideggerian inquiry into the mode of being, Dasein, who asks questions, is circumvented by replacing the epistemological question, how do we know, with the question, who knows, by shortcut, as it were. Here's what Hillman does. Hillman dissolves the Aristotelian and Kantian categories into divine imaginal forms and mythical figures, or angels, providing an entirely new and at the same time a very ancient a priori. The a priori structures within the caverns and dens of the immeasurable imagination. Okay, to me, this is more or less to say the same thing. that we're sort of taking things back to the images themselves and considering them as whether they be as angels, as archetypes, as images, as sort of Kantian categories or imaginal forms, mythical figures. These in some way come first, okay? And in some way, it's the soul that does that has that option available. Avens says, the gods or angels of mythology and psychology are now, quote, personified universals. Personified universals, enabling us to gain distance from the linguistic entrapments of language. By seeing ideas in terms of archetypal images, quote, psyche becomes more clearly separated from its literal identifications, making clearer the mirror by which life is reflected. Okay, so what it's talking about here is a way to sort of avoid literalism and dogmatism that are sort of inherent within the entrapments of language. And so and this is a way to sort of heal nihilism via sort of reorientation or redirection toward images, toward, yeah, those images or archetypes which are in a way the source of life. Yes, so the psyche becomes more clearly separated from its literal identifications. It's the process of de-identification, and that's a kind of clearing process, clearing the mirror. The mirror could be considered the borderline between conscious and unconscious, or the mirror of consciousness itself. So this is the sort of way of avoiding fundamentalism and literalism, healing nihilism. And so it's a kind of the imagistic or symbolic mode of cognizing sort of facilitates the unveiling of space or spaciousness, inner spaciousness, and that gives us more room to move internally by restoring animation, restoring vitality, restoring aliveness, restoring life. That would clearly comport directly with what I've been talking about in terms of ecology of practices, the practice of soul work, perspective taking, clearly connected with spaciousness. That also follows through Jung. For Jung in psychological types, the will or agency is that which kind of takes a perspective on the duality, the conflict, and it's connected with the quality not only of will or agency, but also with spaciousness. The connection being the notion of the free will, free as in having more space around it, free to move. And that can very much be embodied rather than being stuck in a particular story and not realizing that we're actually constricted within that story. We actually unlock inner spaciousness. It's a spaciousness of perspective taking that is very deeply internal. Finally, Avens just wants to clarify what is this mirror that he mentioned. As he said in this way, by seeing ideas in terms of archetypal images, psyche becomes more clearly separated from its literal identifications, making clearer the mirror by which life is reflected. What is this mirror? Heidegger's answer will be that, quote, it is the mirror play of the fourfold, implicating earth and sky, gods and mortals, in the round dance of mutual appropriation. So, which is a rather complicated way of putting it. I would put this in terms of Jungian circumambulation toward wholeness, which is just individuation. But we can also talk about this in terms of Christ's round apocryphal acts of John, Christ's round dance of the cross. There is a quaternity who are in a kind of rotational spiral dynamic. Jung talks about that. Yeah, that apocryphal acts of John episode in the Jung on Christianity playlist is directly relevant to what is meant by this, which is a kind of Christianizing of circumambulation in a way. And I will leave this here. I mean, this was a bit, so what we talked about was Hillman and the notion of the phenomenal archetype and how Hillman changed what Jung was up to and how he sort of updated what Heidegger was going on about, moving beyond Kant. to give priority and more power to the imaginal, to imagination, and the archetypal images which, I don't know, undergird our awareness. I'll leave this here.